can start to record. And I have no indication that it's recording, but okay. Audrey says it's recording, so thank you so much. And I will try to pay attention to the chat, but just know it's really, really hard to monitor chat and to do all of these things. So, all right, welcome. I'm so sorry that we have to do this. I think Monday was super fun and it was a great snow day, and then things got real icy and not great. So I really wanted to do this in this way because I know that for me personally, I just need some structure in terms of I'm teaching at the same time, and I really wanted an opportunity for you all to feel that structure as well, and for you all to have an opportunity to actually be here and ask questions, etc. But again, I know that not everybody can, so I will be recording this. I am recording this hopefully, so that you can watch it later and have access to it later. Okay, so let me see if I can remember how to share my screen. Okay. Okay, so let me tell you a few administrative things first of all. So the first thing I want to tell you, I have not done this yet. So right now, like you just have to have some grace and patience with your faculty. We're trying to have grace and patience as well. It's just like this is all so time intensive. I'm remembering from COVID, right? So one of the things that I do want to do is because we missed Monday. I want to record one of the lectures and put it up async, and that's going to be about some advanced neuron concepts. And I think I mentioned in my announcement, this is something that it's always kind of awkward because I never really know where to talk about it. And it's also something that I know at least half of you probably have a decent concept or grasp on. Things like what's a metabotropic receptor, because you've taken cell bio, because you're a neurominer, et cetera. But it's stuff that I know that we don't necessarily teach in bio or teach in cog neuro. And so I definitely want to have people have the opportunity to sort of get up to speed on those things. So I thought that would be the best thing to post async so that people who already know this information don't have to spend a lot of time reviewing it, and people who are not familiar have access to the videos and can watch and ask me questions, etc. So I will be posting that. I recorded one of those today. It's just going to be like 3 segments on some concepts. And again, it takes so much longer than I remember to like record and upload to YouTube. So I will try to have that posted by today. And really, there's no time constraint on watching it as long as it happens before the first assessment. So I think as long as you've watched it by like February 6th, you should be good. So that will go up. I will post an announcement, let you know where that material is, how to find it, and what you will be responsible for. So I'm going to stop for a second and just anybody questions, you can either chat or you can actually ask me. I'd love to hear a voice. This is all very, I hate this. I do not like teaching to my computer. Okay, I'm not getting anything. Okay, the second administrative thing I wanted to tell you is that I did release the feedback for the review assessment. And so I did post an announcement on this. This is like, as we are online, you need to just be on Canvas and really paying attention to things that I post and making sure that you reach out with questions. And so I think I reviewed everything here in terms of what you need to know. But the big picture is I did provide feedback on this. And so I graded everybody. Many people were good. Like I would say that the majority of scores were in the 40s out of 50, right? So like 80 to 100. I do grade blind, so I didn't know who you were when I was providing feedback. And when you go in to look at the assignment, you should be able to see feedback there. So you should see a box that looks like this. It says feedback. If you lost points on a question and you don't see feedback from me, let me know that because Canvas has been real glitchy with posting feedback. There's like multiple buttons I have to push to do that, and sometimes it doesn't go in sequence. So let me know. Your grade, if you don't revise by February 6th, will be the grade that you received, right? So some people received really high grades, like 48 out of 50. Somebody got a 50 out of 50. So it's up to you whether you want to make revisions. And I just put in this announcement. Just think about like the value of your time, right? Because I know it seems sort of like a big deal, but if you got a 45 out of 50, that means you earn 9 out of 10 points on this assessment for the final grade. So it's just like how much work do you want to do to earn back that one percentage point? Totally like it's your point. So go for it if you want to, but you just want to be thinking about that choice. So if I don't get anything, you don't have to say anything, etc. If I don't see any resubmission by February 6th, this is just going to be your final grade. But you can go and make revisions. And so there's a second attempt at this. You should be able to see everything that you've already written and my feedback. So what I ask you to do is if you're making revisions, do that in a different color font. That way I don't have to read through everything. So I'm not going to look at black font. So if you have changed something, it needs to be in a different color font so I can go back, reread that, and reassign a grade. Once I reassign the grade, your final grade, right, the final number of points that you've earned is going to be the final grade that you get on this assessment. And you need to do that by February 6th by 10 a.m. to get that 10% of the grade. All right, so again, I'm going to stop, see if anybody has questions, ask me or chat. Okay. All right. And you can always reach out to me to ask me questions, especially during this time. I am not going to sit on Zoom for office hours. I find that is very inefficient because I just have to stare at Zoom to see if somebody's come into the waiting room. But if you need to meet with me anytime this week, just shoot me an email and we will figure out a time to chat and do that. Okay, so we are going to spend most of today then talking about roots of administration and moving on from that. And so I am going to try to ask you a few things. I know it's awkward with the um, you're not, I don't see you here. But I would love if I could just get like a little bit of participation just to know that people are out there. And yeah, somebody asked me, can you still ask questions about the review assignment? Yes, definitely come into office hours and ask me questions about the content, right? Again, the point of that review assignment is to get you up to where you need to be for that content. All right, so let's go. So we're talking about roots of administration. So last week, oh, I closed that. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Go back. Maybe. Oh, wait, hold on. Oh, it's there. It's just because I made it big. All right, can people tell me, can you see that when I do that? Like I have it like this. Can you see the Prezi?
Yeah, I can see it.
Awesome, thank you. All right. So we were talking about these roots of administration and how they influence bioavailability. And so we talked about the oral route, the rectal route, the intravenous route, and the inhalation route. And so I just wanted to ask you all, let me go back to, sorry, I know this is being pressy. I had shown this picture when we first started to talk about bioavailability, and I said you're gonna understand this picture better once we talk about the oral versus the intravenous route of administration. So let's come back to this, and if somebody would be willing to talk and to say what is going on here? So now that we have talked about IV and we've talked about oral administration, why do these curves look so different and what is happening here and why? Anybody? I can't see your pictures when I have it shared like this, so I can't tell if anybody's like raising their hand.
I can't remember how to raise my hand, but if nobody else is raising their hand, I guess I could
Yeah, you
talk.
just talk. It's fine.
Uh, So, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind would be, the difference between IV and oral administration being like, first pass metabolism with oral administration. You're going to have a lot more bioavailability with IV. It's going to be a lot quicker.
Right. So the IV, right, because you are injecting it directly into your bloodstream, you don't have to wait for absorption or anything like that. And it is not going to be metabolized, right? It's not going to go through first pass metabolism. So you will have 100% bioavailability. There's nothing to prevent the bioavailability there. With oral administration, you have to wait, right, for the absorption to take place. You have first pass metabolism where you're breaking it down right before you're circulating it. And there's some other factors that we'll talk about today. And so it makes the curve look very different. Somebody else, we talked about inhalation. Which of these would inhalation look more similar to and why?
I feel like it would look more similar to IV since I think with inhalation, it goes into the lungs, and because of all the surface area in the lungs, it can be absorbed and put into the bloodstream really quickly, and it avoids the GI tract, which is where you lose a lot of bioavailability.
Exactly, right. So inhalation we talked about is very fast, not quite as fast as IV, but it is very fast because it goes to the lungs. It is absorbed very quickly. It is then circulated directly to the brain, and you do not have first pass metabolism. So IV will look, or sorry, inhalation is going to look more like IV than oral routes of administration. And so that is where we left off, was talking about, right, when you administer and absorb through the lungs. And so again, just want to stop for a second and see any questions that people have. We talked about that in relationship with caffeine in terms of vaping caffeine, but anything before we move on from that.
I can't remember if you mentioned like what between the difference between the like caffeine capsule that guy, the news guy breathed in the caffeine vape, but I know with the capsule, it's actually just like powdered caffeine. You're just breathing into your lungs, which isn't good. But so with the vape, would that be like a different kind of aerosol? Like,
Yeah, so
or
I
is it
think
still just powder?
exactly. I don't know what the vape is, but I think it's vaporized, right? So that's when we talk about like nicotine vapes, right, or THC vapes. The thing that the vape is doing is it's actually vaporizing that to get into your lungs, right, to be able to be absorbed via the lungs, which is different than that capsule from the Aeroshot, right, which is just like you said, powdered caffeine that they make it seem like you're inhaling, but is actually probably more like your oral ingestion. So that's where vaping comes from, is the vaporization of that substance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the last routes of administration that we want to talk about are the topical routes, and there's actually a fair number of topical routes. So topical means any time that a drug is applied to the skin or to the mucous membrane of the body. And so a lot of pictures here, we're not going to talk about all of these, right? But like you could apply topically via the eye because you can absorb through like the membranes around the eye, on the skin, etc. Um, Sometimes topical administration is for local administration, right? So sometimes it's just to influence the thing that is sort of local. Like if you put something that's supposed to be numbing, right, on your skin, it's not necessarily absorbing into the bloodstream and getting circulated and affecting you systemically, right? It's affecting just that area of the skin. But sometimes topical administration does get absorbed into the bloodstream. So we're going to talk about three key ones. We're going to talk about intranasal, sublingual or buccal, and transdermal. And some of you were these types of administration, right? When we did this last week. And so intranasal, we've actually referenced intranasal a little bit before. This is when you atomize the substance. So not everything can be administered intranasally. You have to be able to put it into a form where you can atomize it and so it can absorb. And intranasal is going to absorb across the epithelial layer. So that's just sort of the layer of skin, et cetera, that covers the entire body. So you can see if you are administering this like via the nose, right, these molecules are going up, and they are absorbing across that layer. So this is something that, again, people sometimes confuse with inhalation, because inhalation, we think about like, oh, we breathe in via the nose, right? So that's inhalation. But this is not like going through your nose into your lungs, right? This is actually being absorbed across the mucous membranes within your nose. And one big thing about this is that it can bypass the blood-brain barrier. So this is one of the only routes of administration where if you have something that cannot normally get through that blood-brain barrier, if you are able to administer it intranasally, and again, you can't do that with everything, that there is that vulnerability. So I'm going to come back to this in a second, but I just want to remind you, right? We looked at this slide, we talked about the blood-brain barrier. We talked about these different places where we have vulnerabilities, right? So any place where we're releasing hormones like the pineal gland or the hypothalamus. And then near the olfactory bulb, we have this vulnerability. And so if you can administer things near that olfactory bulb, you can get things within the neural system that you would not normally be able to get into there via other routes of administration because it can't bypass the blood-brain barrier. And then, sorry about that. Also, it is again, right, it avoids the GI system, it's parenteral. So this is another one where you are avoiding first pass metabolism. All right, so I'll stop there, let you process, see if anybody has any questions. I'll look at the chat. So if you want to ask questions in the chat too, I can do that.
I have a question. I'm forgetting my question as I'm sitting here. Is there like side effects where when you take something intranasally, like some of it goes to the lungs, so it's like sort of inhalation?
I mean, sometimes you can get like where if you squirt things up your nose, right, like there can be some like drip down into like the back of the throat, etc. So like I think that there's a possibility where something like that could happen, but usually this is at such a low level, like if you think about like nasal sprays, right, or something like that, that it's not going to be very likely that you will get it into your system in that way. A really good example of this, somebody came into office hours last class and asked me about this, is the hormone oxytocin. So we produce oxytocin, and this goes back to thinking about, right, like the vulnerability near the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. We produce oxytocin, and so it can get into the system in this way, right? Because we produce it in a place where hormones can cross. But we can't give oxytocin easily exogenously. And oxytocin, if you're not familiar, is like the bonding, social bonding hormone, right? So we know like mothers produce it when they have children, et cetera. And so oxytocin, if I gave it to you orally or I tried to inject it, it wouldn't easily get past the blood-brain barrier, but you can put it into a form where you can deliver it intranasally. And so this is in studies where people have been trying to study the effect of oxytocin. People have been trying to administer it that way because you are taking advantage of that vulnerability. Other questions?
I have a clarification question. So, like for you said intranasal, it bypasses the blood-brain barrier because of easy access to the olfactory bulb.
Because the blood-brain barrier is not robust in that area. Like you don't have those tight junctions in that area that you do in other parts of the brain.
Surrounding the olfactory bulb, right? Okay,
Correct.
cool.
Yep, correct.
I also have a question just
Yes.
about the certain types of drugs that can be intranasally administered. You said that they have to be atomized. What exactly does that mean?
So basically put into a form where they're atoms that can be absorbed. And I don't know, I have to go back and think about other things like what makes it so that a drug can be easily put into that form. I don't know the chemistry of that. If somebody wants to jump in with the chemistry of that, you can. But basically, yeah, put into an atom form so that it can be easily absorbed.
Isn't atomizing just where it's like it sprays into very fine particles,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, although there are, yes, and I want to clarify too, because other things can be delivered intranasally. Like cocaine can be delivered intranasally, but that is not atomized, right? Like, so it's not, that is sort of a misstatement on my part to say like everything needs to be in that way. It just needs to be in a form that can be absorbed, right? And to put it into that form of being able to spray it in that way, um, is a way that you can get some of those drugs in that you can't get in other ways. Okay. I have no facial feedback. Sorry. I don't know if that flew or not. If you are really interested in this, I do have a video. I would not show this video even if we were in person in class. It's a little bit long, but it's super interesting. It's about gene therapy and the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And section 515 to 1115 is a section where she talks very explicitly about using the intranasal route of administration and being able to bypass the blood-brain barrier as a way to start to think about treatments for Parkinson's. So this is a really great, if you are interested in doing some extra credit, this is a nice thing to watch, and you could write like a little reflection about what you learned from this. So I just like to keep it up here so people have that. Okay. Oh, and now it's going to show. All right. Okay. So another form of transdermal, or sorry, topical administration is to administer something sublingually or via what we call buccal administration. So that's either under the tongue is the sublingual route, or buccal is basically between the gums and the cheek so that it can absorb through that membrane in your mouth. So this is another one where people sometimes are like, is that oral or how is that getting absorbed? Sometimes people consider it enteral because sometimes you are absorbing it more orally, right? But then it's actually oral absorption. But if you are literally like not swallowing any of this and it is absorbing through the membranes in your mouth, under your tongue, or in your cheek, then again, it is parenteral and it is avoiding first pass metabolism. So we often see drugs like this, like sometimes LSD is applied like this, or other drugs where you are going to absorb it through the mouth as opposed to swallowing it. I'll stop for a second.
I have a question about this
Yes.
administration.
Yeah.
So how does it avoid first pass metabolism? Is it if it eventually ends up in the veins and circulation?
Because first pass metabolism is usually only when it's going through the GI system. So if you swallowed this and it went like down the GI tract and into your stomach and into your small intestines, etc., then it would be absorbed into that area where you have that portal vein to the liver, and then it would go through first pass metabolism. But if you're putting it under your tongue or in your cheek, then it is absorbing through the membranes in your mouth, just into the bloodstream, and it is bypassing that GI route, right? So it's just getting into the bloodstream and starting to circulate before it goes to the liver to be metabolized, before it then is circulated more. So doing it this way, you're avoiding the GI system.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. This is again, I'm just trying to bring back to caffeine. There are, and I am not advocating any of these things, and like do your research if you're wanting to think about using any of these, but they do have sublingual or buccal administration of caffeine. They have these caffeine strips where you're supposed to just put it inside your cheek and let it dissolve. And that is a more buccal administration as a way. And again, it doesn't really matter, right, with oral administration because you don't have first pass metabolism of caffeine. But it's a way that they try to sell caffeine products, and it probably does increase the onset time, because you don't have to wait for it to go through the whole absorbing from the small intestines. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, I don't know if you recall or like talk about like one of the things that I had a question. It was similar to this, but
Mhm.
does it matter the placement of like the medication or like where it is in the mouth? Like, say if you put it on the roof of your mouth, or just like, does it matter the placement of
I mean, I
said thing?
think, yeah, often I think that the sublingual and the buccal are to avoid as much as you can, like swallowing stuff, right? So if you're putting it like on your tongue or on the roof of your mouth, you're probably going to swallow some of the saliva that has that in that, and then that is also going to be like administered orally. For some things like nicotine, that's going to make you sick, right? So if you have tobacco products, right, or snuff or something like that, that you're putting into your cheek and you swallow that saliva, that's why people spit it out. It makes you ill, right? So I think that part of that placement is meant to prevent you from doing that, makes it a little bit less likely to do that.
Got you.
Yeah. Okay, and then finally, we have the transdermal route. So transdermal is you're applying things to absorb through your skin. And again, this is avoiding the GI system, and so it's going to avoid first pass metabolism. So the general theme is it needs to go through the GI system in order to be subject to first pass metabolism. This is something that sometimes gets a little confusing because often when we're applying things to the skin, we are looking for an effect on the skin. So I heard a lot of people when we were doing that activity last class, last time we met, where you were talking about caffeine patches, and there are 100% caffeine patches that people use, but usually that is used as a more local thing to affect the area that you're putting the caffeine patch on. So like I know people use caffeine patches and caffeine creams for cellulite. It's supposed to be effective in like changing the pockets of fat, right, to more evenly distribute. It's not as effective for caffeine to absorb through the skin into the bloodstream to circulate and to have a psychoactive effect. Like you're not going to get a massive caffeine boost from administering transdermally. But there are some things, right? And again, I put this here, right, where people do try to sell it that way. Again, I would encourage, like, if you're thinking of doing that, to go in and to think about the actual effectiveness of this, right, and whether this actually works to give you the caffeine boost that you're looking for. But some drugs more easily do this, right? So like nicotine is one. We talk about the nicotine patch, where nicotine fairly effectively will absorb through the skin into the bloodstream and is a way to administer nicotine that is not inhalation. And we'll come back to talk about that later when we talk about nicotine. So I just sometimes it's confusing because why we're putting it on the skin can differ. And we're really trying to think about like it getting into the bloodstream to circulate to the brain to have a psychoactive effect. All right. Questions about that? Questions about any of these? So that was our last route of administration. And again, really want to emphasize these are the ones that you're responsible for. I know the book talks about more. I know it talks about intramuscular. I know it talks about IP, subcutaneous. A lot of drugs are not administered that way recreationally, and so we're not going to talk about those. The book does have a nice sort of summary, and again, it lists some of these that you're not responsible for, so IM, SC, etc. But I think that this is a nice overview for the drugs that we did discuss, or the routes that we did discuss: oral and IV, inhalation, topical, transdermal, intranasal, etc. And they are considering topical to be right? Like topical is actually sort of a broader category that I consider transdermal and intranasal to be a subcategory of. But this is just sort of a nice overview to think about, like, when would you use this? Why would you use this route? Because for every drug, we're going to think about like the advantages and disadvantages of administering it in different ways. All right, so any final questions about route of administration? Okay. Moving on. All righty. Okay, so we have talked about how where you administer the drug is going to influence how much of that drug is available to bind to target sites. And that is related to different absorption factors, right? Like things will absorb differently from the small intestines than it will absorb through the lungs. Something else, another factor that influences how bioavailable a drug is something that we call depot binding. And so this is something that I played the song Depot Depot, so from Tom Waits, because it uses the term depot. It's a hard one to find a song for. And depot binding, again, just remember like all of these are different factors that we have to think about that influence how available a drug is. So depot binding is the idea that when you think about a drug binding to something, traditionally, what we want when we want a psychoactive effect is we want a ligand. So I say ligand. I know it can be either ligand or ligand. It's one of these that goes back and forth. Ligand just sounds really weird to me, but I know that like most of your bio and chem professors use that. So I will often say like ligand, ligand. A ligand or ligand is a chemical like a neurotransmitter or hormone, a drug that will bind to a receptor. So what we have here is a picture of a receptor that is embedded in a cell membrane, and binding to this receptor is going to influence channels right within the cell membrane. So when the ligand or the ligand binds to a receptor, it can activate these sites that cause a cellular change, and that's what's going to influence the drug action. So you all in this review assignment, right, one of the things I asked you was about voltage gated channels, right, which are when ion channels open as a function of the voltage changing. And that is in contrast to the channels that you also probably know about, which are these ligand gated channels, right, or ligand gated channels. So ligand gated channels are when you have these ion channels that ions can flow through. And when a ligand binds, so usually it's a neurotransmitter or hormone, but if you put a drug into your system, it can also be a drug. When it binds, it's going to open that channel and it's going to allow things to flow in and out of the cell. So that's going to create action potentials, or it's going to create IPSPs. When we have a drug involved, it's going to create changes in the cells that can create, right, changes that we see psychoactively. Depot binding is not that, right? So I like to set that up to say, like, this is what we usually think of drugs binding to, right? We put them in our system so they can bind to a receptor. Depot binding is if they are binding to anything else. They are binding to some inactive site, which means when they bind, they are not going to have any effect on the thing that they're binding to. So if I put a drug into my system, that drug can bind to fats in my body. It can bind to different proteins in my body. So this picture here is your free drug, and these are just plasma proteins that are in your plasma, and the drug can bind to those proteins. It can bind to muscle. And if it binds to those things, it is not initiating any type of cellular change. So last class, I showed you this video about absorption, right, and first-pass metabolism. I want to show you just this example of something that can happen to a drug that's in your system that would count as depot binding, just to give you a visual of this. And I know it's very weird to like show a video on Zoom, but I'm just going to pretend like this is my normal lecture.
Absorption refers to the metabolism. Others may be enterohepatic cycling. Other parts of the oral dosage may be absorbed in the large intestine or fecally excreted. All of the drug dosage may not be absorbed. The drug molecules may bind to intestinal contents, which prevents their being passed through the membranes of the mucosal cells.
Okay, so that was not super exciting. But when a drug binds to, for example, food in your stomach, right, like what is the effect of that going to be? What does that do to your bioavailability, do you think? And somebody can just like shout out the answer.
Reduce it.
Say it again. Do you want me to repeat it?
Reduce it.
Oh, yeah. Why would it reduce it?
Because can you repeat the question again?
Yeah.
Just so I can properly.
Yeah. So if a drug is binding to those food molecules within your GI system, you're saying that that's going to reduce the bioavailability of the drug. Why would that reduce the bioavailability of the drug? You're correct. I will tell you, you're correct.
Because it's going through all of that first pass metabolism, and if it's going through that GI tract, it's just not going to be getting through where you intend it to be.
Yeah, so it's less here about the first pass metabolism and more about the fact that it can absorb. If I'm a drug that is bound to this piece of food, or if I'm bound to fat, I'm bound to a protein, plasma protein, I'm bound to muscle, I can't get through the membranes that I need to get through, right? Like if I'm in the GI system and I'm bound to food, if my goal is to absorb and pass through the cell membrane to get into the bloodstream, I can't do that. And if I can't do that, then I'm not available to bind to a target site. So one of the things that depot binding can do is depot binding can at least temporarily, this is not necessarily a permanent thing, but at least temporarily reduce the bioavailability of a drug because it means that it can't absorb through the membranes it needs to absorb through to get into or out of the bloodstream in order to have an effect.
Could I ask,
Yeah.
that, I mean, that doesn't sound exactly like helpful when taking a drug. So
It's
why
not.
did they have you take medicine with food?
So sometimes they have you take medicine with food to actually delay the onset of the thing, right? So one of the things that can do is it can delay the onset, it can slow the absorption. Sometimes you don't want the medication to have an immediate effect. Other times taking medication with food can make you nauseous, right? And can upset your stomach, or sorry, without food. So a lot of these things are accounted for, right? If we know, okay, there's going to be a certain amount of depot binding, it's going to impact the absorption, then we prescribe with that knowledge, right? To know like we actually want to reduce the bioavailability initially and extend, right, the amount of time that the medication is occurring. All right, what other questions about that?
So
I have-
like
Oh, you go ahead.
Somebody go. I can't see who's asking them, so I
Okay.
can't like dictate.
I'll try again.
Okay.
Would depot binding still be an example of maybe when a ligand binds to a non-receptor, but it doesn't have the intended drug effect? However, there is some effect.
If there is an effect, then you are probably talking more about like a side effect, right? So if I'm binding to something that's creating an effect that's not the intended therapeutic effect, but there is an effect on the cell and it changes the physiological system, then you're probably talking more of a side effect than actual depot binding. Depot, so the word depot is like think of it like a train depot. Like I'm just hanging out there, just waiting, right, for something. And eventually it will be released. And so I'm gonna come back to that in a second. So eventually, the drug is not bound to that thing forever. It's gonna be bound and until there's dissociation, which is a more advanced concept of like why it would bind and why it would dissociate. Somebody else had a question too.
yes, I wanted to ask especially when you talk about things such as alcohol, if this is like the reason why if you were to eat a lot of food before you drink, it won't affect you as much as if you were like drinking on an empty stomach.
Yes, some of that could be depot binding. Some of that could also be just the concentration, right? So if you have a lot of alcohol in your stomach and small intestines, or stomach, with a lot of food, it's going to dilute the concentration, which makes the pressure to absorb, right? If you think about things absorbing down their concentration gradient, less, right? If you just have alcohol and that's all that's in your stomach, you're going to have this really high concentration and it's going to have a lot of pressure to absorb across the membrane to a place where there's less alcohol. So it can speed the absorption of that. And there's other factors too, right, that can influence like how quickly or how much of that alcohol is actually absorbed. Okay. Something else, another consequence of depot binding, is that a drug can't be metabolized while it is depot bound, right? Because in order to be metabolized, we have to be able to pass it into the bloodstream, to be able to circulate it, and to be able to get it into the liver to clear it, which is a thing that we'll talk about probably in our next meeting. So this has the possibility, even though we are reducing the bioavailability of the drug temporarily, depot binding can also extend the possibility of a drug action, right? Or extend the possibility of the drug being in your system. And so this is something that with THC, we know that THC, it is very, very lipid soluble, and it loves to bind to fats. Like it just loves to hang out. And so THC, if you don't know, is the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. And so it loves to bind to fat and it will hang out there for a long time. And so this is an article, you don't need to know anything from this article, but I just put it in here where they were looking at reintoxication in rats, for rats who had delta 9 THC in their blood. And then they deprived them, they did food deprivation, right? So the THC was binding to the fat. And then as they were food depriving, right, the THC was being re-released and they were looking at signs for intoxication. So this is something that is not typical. Like in humans, we know that we bind the THC in fat. We are usually not re-intoxicated as we start to release the THC back into the system and it circulates. But it does mean that the THC is in your system for a long time and that you have not metabolized that THC. So this is like my PSA to people who have to do drug tests, right? If they're testing for THC, THC can stay in your system even if you're not feeling the effects of it for a very long time. So if you're getting drug tested for this drug, you can't be like, oh, I just did it like a week ago and it's not going to show up. There is a possibility that it will show up because it is circulating in your system for a very long time because it can't be metabolized because it is bound to fats. All right, I'll stop there for a second. Questions or thoughts? Okay. Usually,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I know we haven't super talked about half-lives of drugs yet, but could half-lives of drug impact depot binding? Like if it's bound to fat, would it break down over time due to the half-life, or does it have to be disassociated from where it's bound first?
Depot binding will influence the half-life. So yes, you're correct. We will talk about half-lives probably next week. Just for people who don't know, a half-life is basically the amount of time it takes you to metabolize a drug. And THC has a very, very long half-life because of its tendency to depot bind to fat, right? Because it tends to hang out in your system for so long, it takes just that much longer to metabolize. So it's sort of the opposite. The depot binding influences is part of one of the factors for how long your half-life is.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, the last thing, and this is something that I really like, I love to be in the classroom to do because it's just a lot easier. This is a little bit confusing. But depot binding can influence, it can actually increase bioavailability. So I know we said last time on the last slide, if a drug is bound to something that is inactive, then it means it can't bind to something that is active, right? So it will reduce bioavailability. But if you take two drugs simultaneously and they both depot bind to the same thing, it can influence the bioavailability of one of those drugs and make it more bioavailable than you would think that it would be. So I'm going to talk through these figures here and see if I can zoom in a little bit. No, it's not going. Okay, there we go. Okay, so in this figure, what this is saying is, let's say you take drug A. And drug A really likes to bind to these proteins. So albumin is just a protein. So I'm studying drug A. I know it likes to bind to these proteins. And so I just know that about its bioavailability, right? I know it's going to bind for a certain amount of time. I know how it's going to reduce bioavailability, and I can predict that. Drug B also likes to bind to these same proteins, right? So if I take either of these on their own, then they're going to depot bind, and it can be pretty predictable. Like people study how depot binding influences the bioavailability, and they will study, right, like what we can expect. But if you take these two drugs at the same time, Now they are competing for the same depot binding spot. So this is where I use like the desks in the classroom, right? Like you all are the drug, and let's say the desks are binding sites on these proteins, right? If you all are used to coming in and you sit in your desk, right? I know how much we're going to reduce bioavailability. Now let's say two classes came in at the same time and you're both going for the same desk that you usually sit in. There's going to be a competition. And whoever loses out is all of a sudden not going to be depot bound, and it's going to have an increased bioavailability. So this could be one. This is not the only reason, but it could be one reason for a drug interaction, right? When you take two drugs at the same time, all of a sudden, right, one of the drugs has a greater effect than you expected it to, because usually it depot binds, but now it can't because another drug is depot binding. So what this says at the bottom here, two drugs are competing for the same binding site. That will increase the bioavailability of one of them, whoever the loser is for that competition to the binding site, compared to when that drug is taken alone. Stop talking for a second to let you process that.
Is it essentially like a game of like musical chairs in a way? Like you have them all there and they're like, oh, like if I can get to it first, I get depot bound, and then the
Pretty
other
much.
ones.
Yes. I think musical chairs is a good analogy, right? Like there's more drug than binding sites, and they're competing, right? And when the music stops, like they're gonna go and they're going to whoever wins. And then so that's then like how you have to study the chemical composition of the drug, because it depends on the drug, right? Like which drug is more likely to bind, which drug is gonna win the competition. When we come back on Friday, and we will do this on Friday, I have this quick video that I'll show you. Because a good example of this is not psychoactive, but a good example of this is if you take the drug warfarin, which is an anticoagulant, and aspirin together, they have this competition for binding sites that can make the warfarin more bioavailable. So it makes it dangerous, right? Because you have more of it in your system than you think. So that's where we will pick up on Friday. And then the fourth thing about depot binding that the book talks about is it terminates the drug action. They do not do a good job explaining that. It does not become relevant later in our conversation. And so I've sort of eliminated that. So I'm just going to focus on these three big consequences of depot binding. So what you should do between now and Friday is just think about what we talked about today. Contact me if you have questions. I'm happy to talk about this material. I know that this is not an ideal way to talk about it. And then when we come back on Friday, we're going to we'll finish up on this. I'll show you this video. And then we're going to talk mainly about metabolism, sorry, metabolism of the drug, and how that can also influence bioavailability. And that's where we'll get to things like half-lives. So, all right. I am willing to stick around if anybody wants to stick around, ask questions. But for the rest of you, I am good for today. Thank you for bearing with me with this. Hopefully this is super temporary. We'll do this on Friday, and next Monday, hopefully we'll be back in person, and I'll get to see your faces and have feedback on whether any of this is hitting. So, all right. Bye all. Awkward
Thank you.
ending Zoom wave. Bye.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.